So everyone, thank you again so much for being here. We are very excited to have everyone here today. I'm going to go right into our next keynote speaker, Dan Pallotta. Looks like Dan is here. Hi, Dan.
Hi. Are you Connie?
I am Connie.
Nice to meet you, Connie.
Likewise. It's such an honor.
Thank you.
So we'll be having a fireside chat with Dan. I'm going to change my background for we can have a real fireside chat.
This is great. Good.
And we'll be outside, so it's COVID friendly. So Dan is an activist, a humanitarian, author, and the builder of movements. He is a pioneer in the national effort to transform the way our culture evaluates the character and impact of nonprofit organizations. His iconic TED Talk on philanthropy has been viewed more than 5 million times. I know personally, and for our board and our staff, that 2013 TED Talk has inspired much of what we do at BitGive and why. Dan is the author of Uncharitable, How Restraints on Nonprofits Undermine Their Potential. It's a best-selling title in the history of Tufts University Press. And Dan has many other accomplishments. It is simply a dream come true to have you join us here today for this inaugural BitGive event. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, Connie. Thanks for asking me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I look forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. So we have some questions we prepared for our fireside chat. I don't know if you have some hot cocoa and some marshmallows, but we'll start out with how did your career in the nonprofit sector begin? What motivated you to devote yourself to change?
You know, I grew up in the 60s. I was born in 1961, so I was 2 years. I was born the first full day of John Kennedy's presidency, and I was 2 years old when he died, and I think I was 5 years old, or no, 7 years old when Robert Kennedy died and Martin Luther King died, and these were, global political leaders talking about the huts and villages of half the globe where the poorest people lived, and talking about justice in terms of love. The Attorney General of the United States talking about love openly. And it was the middle of the Vietnam War. So, when I was 6 and 7 and 8 years old, every night Walter Cronkite was on the CBS Evening News reporting the body count, burned out Vietnamese villages and bloodied American soldiers, and night after night after night. And you just, as a sense, got this, as a kid, you got this sense of the futility of the human condition, as if we were powerless over these things. Nobody knew how to stop the Vietnam War. Your parents couldn't explain it to you. The president didn't understand it. Yet at the same time, we were in the midst of Apollo. And, in June of 1969, when I was 8 years old, Neil Armstrong was walking on the moon. So it was this confluence of futility and heroism and big thinking. And I think in me, it was formative, and it created this alchemy of, I want to do something to help the world, but it has to be big. It has to be as big as going to the moon. I don't want to do any little tiny small things. I want to do something big. So I think those were the early influences,
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot to take in, especially as a young child. Thankfully, there were positive things going on as well to balance it out. I can imagine that all would be very inspiring. So what was your first foray into activism?
I chaired the Hunger Action Committee at Harvard as an undergraduate. And we used to do small fundraisers for Oxfam that would raise a couple $1,000s a year. But I was studying world hunger, and I was learning about the massive mortality, 20 million people at the time dying every year of hunger and hunger-related disease, 2/3 of them children, mostly dying of diarrhea. And in light of those unbelievable statistics, these fundraisers we were doing seemed impotent and ineffectual, and I was very frustrated, and I wanted to do something big, but I didn't have any big ideas. And then the summer before my senior year, I heard about these two guys who were bicycling across America to raise money for cancer research. And that was like a smelling salt for me. It like woke me up out of my sleep and made me realize, oh, I'm not thinking nearly big enough. And that's what I want to do. I want to organize a bike ride across America to raise awareness for hunger. And so started organizing it. And the next summer, 39 of us took a 6-hour flight from Boston to Seattle. And then we spent the next 9.5 weeks pedaling our bicycles 4,256 miles across the continental United States. And when we got back into Cambridge, you know, we had raised $80,000 for Oxfam, and which was a lot more than we had been raising. And we were on television everywhere. We were on Good Morning America, and we got to ride around Shea Stadium before the Mets game, and they played Chariots of Fire and put us on the Jumbotron, and everyone was crying. But when we got back into Cambridge, you know, we felt spent, like we had done the most we could possibly do for a cause we cared about deeply. And I had been very hungry to experience that, you know, to like, please God, at least on one front in my life, don't let me die with my music still in me. And so then a few years later, I moved to Los Angeles. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic. I'm gay. And again, the only opportunity were these small gestures, you know, stick a red ribbon on your jacket, go to the AIDS dance-a-thon on Saturday night and dance for 3 hours. It was incongruent with the loss, you know. I mean, you're burying your 26-year-old friends, you're putting them in diapers, you're watching them go through dementia, you're meeting their parents at their funerals. And so I thought about that journey, and we created this event called California AIDS Ride. It was a 7-day bike ride from San Francisco to LA. You had to go the whole 7 days. You had to go the whole 600 miles. You had to sleep in a tent every night. You had to raise $2,000 in order to do it, and that had never been done before. And it was successful, and so we began building the AIDS rides, and then we created the breast cancer 3 days, and I built a large company. We had 400 full-time employees in 16 US offices. We had 180,000 people participate in those events. They raised over $600 million in 9 years. It was more money raised more quickly for those causes than any events in history. And we were one of the very first Harvard Business School case studies on social enterprise, you know, all just based on the simple idea that people are tired of being asked to do the least they can possibly do. When it comes to the causes that have really broken their hearts, that people yearn to be asked to do the most they can possibly do. So that's how that all started.
Wow. Well, I would say that you accomplished your dream of doing something really big for sure, and really making a difference. And you know, just for those who are watching that aren't as familiar, Dan actually invented and pioneered the multi-day charity events. The things that he's been talking about were never done before. So very, very innovative approach to philanthropy and really making a huge difference. So, so next, let's talk about your TED Talk. I mentioned it in our introduction. The way we think about charity is dead wrong. Has been viewed over 5 million times. You know, personally, I've been in the nonprofit space for a long time. I absolutely love the message and truly honor it. But for the purpose of our audience, you know, what do you think is wrong about the way we think about charity, and why do you think that talk has been so popular?
You know, it's funny that TED Talk. I was the last speaker at the TED conference 2013, and that was the last time they did it in Long Beach, and then they moved it to Vancouver. And so, you know, you sit there for 4 days watching everyone else's TED Talk, and you really psych yourself out, you know. And especially like the other TED Talks with a woman who discovered the giant squid, and she had all this high resolution video of a 4-story tall squid in the Atlantic Ocean or whatever it was. And this group of brothers, these 8-year-old banjo prodigies who could, you know, play the banjo faster than Mario Andretti could drive. And you're watching all this stuff and you're going, this talk on the economics of the nonprofit sector is going to go over like a lead balloon. And it didn't. I think it just captured a lot of pregnant articulation that people had that they had never put together. You know, Ted, last week they took down all the comments from all their talks. I'm not sure why. And they let all the speakers know they were doing that. And so I asked them, where did my TED Talk rank in terms of the number of comments? It was the 16th most commented TED Talk of all time across every single category. So it really, really struck a nerve with people. Like, it was something people were ready to talk about. Because I think a big part of the TED audience wants to change the world, you know? So what I meant, to answer your question, by the way we think about charity is dead wrong. Let me say it simply first. I think, you know, we wonder sometimes, why haven't charities changed the world the way we had hoped that they would? Why are we still dealing with poverty at, you know, 12%, suicide at you know, rates increasing by 50%, illiteracy at 14% in the United States? And I think it's because changing the world is not what we asked charities to do. What we asked them to do very emphatically and forcefully and threateningly is keep your overhead and your salaries low. That's what we specifically asked them to do. And so they obliged. Everything became secondary to, let's not run afoul of people who think we should keep our salaries and our overhead low. And so I think, to get a little deeper into how we think about this is wrong, think of the nonprofit sector as being in prison, and the for-profit sector as being free to roam and do whatever it wants. Economic prison, economic freedom. And I think that prison exists in 5 different areas. The first is in the area of reward, where for-profits can pay people whatever they want. You know, they pay people based on the value they believe someone is producing. But we don't want nonprofits to use money to motivate people to produce more value and social change. It's all supposed to come from the goodness of their heart. We have an angry reaction to the idea that anyone would want to make much money helping other people. We don't have an angry reaction to the notion that people would want to make a lot of money not helping other people, right? And that's just weird. You want to make $50 million selling sugar water to kids in the developing world, go for it. We'll put you on the cover of Fortune magazine, but you want to be paid $1 million to try and end hunger in the city of Boston, where I live, and you're considered a mercenary and a parasite. And we think of that as our code of ethics and don't realize, hey, that little code of ethics there has a powerful unintended side effect. It sends thousands and thousands of the most talented people coming out of our best universities every year, who could make a huge difference in the nonprofit sector, marching right into the for-profit sector every year, because they're not willing to make that kind of lifelong economic sacrifice. So God knows what kind of talent we don't have in the sector, because we have this prohibition on you making the kind of money that you would need to make to fulfill your economic dreams for your family. Secondly, advertising. You want to advertise beer, pretzels, Apple Watch, Levi's, spend whatever you want. Spend to your heart's delight advertising that stuff to get consumers to buy it. You want to spend money advertising Save the Children? You got to get the advertising donated. I don't want any of my donations spent on advertising. Well, what does that mean? It means that the for-profit sector has this, I mean, understatement to say lopsided volume when it comes to indoctrinating the general public in consumption. And the nonprofit sector, lips are sealed when it comes to trying to indoctrinate people in compassion. You know, we wonder, how can we make it a more loving world? I was in Charlotte giving a speech. They have huge problems with economic mobility. They issued a report, and on the cover it asked, how do we create a community of caring? As if, you know, that was a really difficult question to answer, never to be answered in our lifetime. It's a philosophical, existential question. I don't think it's a difficult question at all. How do we create a community of caring? Same way we created a community of consumption. We invest in it massively every single day, inundating people with ads for L'Oreal and M&M and McDonald's and Disney. And if anybody thinks we are somehow going to create a world of love and compassion without competing with that lopsided indoctrination screaming at us in the most luxurious advertising every day to consume, we're just living in a fool's paradise. You know, nonprofit, yeah, well, anyway. The third area is risk-taking. You know, Elon Musk can take a huge risk. Jeff Bezos can launch the Amazon mobile Fire Phone. It's a big flop. Does he go into shameful hiding? No, he goes out 2 weeks later and buys Whole Foods, right? But nonprofits, you take a risk on some fundraising idea and it doesn't produce 90% back to the cause, like it's a flop and none of the money went to the cause. It all got consumed by the fundraising expense because the experiment didn't work, just like it didn't work with the mobile Fire Phone. And you can have the Attorney General knocking on your door. So nonprofits will not try innovation in fundraising because something goes wrong, that's the end of them. Then there's time, you know, where if you stay with the example of Amazon, they went for 6 years with no profit, going back to investors. Investors knew it was a long-term proposition. In charity, you got to prove your results every 12 months. You got to show me every 12 months that 90% of the money went to the cause and only 10% of the money was spent on overhead. And then the last thing is capital itself. So, you know, the for-profit sector has a capital market. It has the stock market. IPOs all the time for the wildest ideas, SpaceX, TikTok, Uber, Lyft, you know, whatever the next new wild idea is. And thank God, because we get all of this breakthrough innovation in society because it's all of this wonderful play money. But the nonprofit sector can't pay profits. So it's starved for any kind of growth capital or risk capital or idea capital. So you put those 5 things together, can't use money to lure talent away from the for-profit sector. Don't advertise, that's wasteful. Don't take any risks, that's irresponsible. Make everything happen in 12 months and you don't have a stock market. You've just put the nonprofit sector at the most extreme disadvantage to the for-profit sector on every single level. And then we wonder, why isn't it changing the world?
Yeah, absolutely powerful. I think, you know, these messages are things that many people need to hear, haven't heard before, or are, you know, riveted by your TED Talk, and hence the amount of views and comments. And I have tried very much to push your message out myself as well. It's just so critical. And before I started BitGive, was working with nonprofits for 15 years. It's been over 20 years now. And I really understand the importance of this message, and I hope we can get it out even more. So the next question would be, where do you feel these ideas, these broken ideas, are coming from? Like, why do we feel this way about nonprofits?
Well, I know, you know, you have people listening from around the world, and I think that the U.S. is a big part of the problem. I think because our philanthropic sector is so developed, our ideas contaminate the rest of the world, and people look to us for best practices. So if the best practice is keep your overhead low, then that's what New Zealand's going to do, and Australia is going to do, and Ireland's going to do, and the UK is going to do. And in the US, I think these ideas are religious. They come from old Puritan constructs, where the Puritans came here in the 1600s, and they came here to make a lot of money. But at the same time, they were Calvinists. And so, you know, Calvin taught them that self-interest was a sure path to hell. And so that was a difficult tension. You know, on the one hand, you're telling me that wealth is a sign that I'm right with God, but you're telling me self-interest is a path to hell. And so charity became their answer. It became this economic sanctuary where they could do penance for their profit-making tendencies without stopping their profit-making tendencies at 5 cents on the dollar. So of course, how could you make money in charity, or let anybody make money in charity, if charity was your penance for making money in the first place? And in 400 years, nothing has intervened to say that's really dysfunctional. And I think, you know, wherever there's the concept of original sin, where there's this notion that the self is evil, then you need something to mitigate that evil. And charity becomes society's mechanism for mitigating our evil nature. So you can't mess with it, because if you mess with it, you're messing with the most fundamental existential questions in the world. And I think when I say it's religious, that's exactly why, of all of the differences of opinion that Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump have, They don't have a difference of opinion on how charities ought to operate. You keep your overhead and you keep your salaries low and you maximize the amount of money that goes to the cause. You know, Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz, you know, that there's one thing they can agree on. It's the sanctity of these religious canons we have about charity. And I think that's also, that a lot, I don't want to go on too long. I think that's where it comes from. And I did a lot of research in writing on Charitable, and it was sort of fascinating to read the journals of John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts, and he's coming over here to make all of this money, and his journals have all this information about the profit that he thinks he and his partner can make in all of these different, you know, animal husbandry and crops and other things. But at the same time, he's preaching to people that profit is evil. The profit for self-interest is evil. So, and, you know, we pretty much are stuck with that same system today.
It's so unfortunate, and it's so deeply embedded in us. And what you were saying earlier is why for me, I wonder, why is it not deeply embedded in us to just want to give back to our own people and community and environment, and that should be praised and raised up, instead of it being like, well, you have to, make up for the bad things you're doing. It should be an honor to recognize and invest in the most important things in our lives and our environment.
Yeah, and you get two forces coming at you, right? I mean, you cannot underestimate the assault of the indoctrination to consume. And it's not just in terms of the advertising you see online, when you go to whatever it is, CNN or Fox or NPR, the page is blanketed with an ad for a movie, right? And then you go into the store, and what are the shelves are full of things that you can consume, and the stores are edifices. I mean, the Apple stores, they're churches. I mean, I love the Apple stores. I love architecture, and I'm so glad that they do that. They're a contribution to architecture, but those things are churches. Nonprofits don't even have stores. You can't walk into a store and buy a contribution for helping someone. So you can't underestimate, I think naturally we do want to help one another, but you put one of us through 10 years of consumption indoctrination, and that all changes. And then you add this Puritan guilt trip on top of it, and you've got a really dysfunctional civil society when it comes to helping the least among us. And then, we want to blame capitalism. I don't know whether this will be controversial or not, but I don't think capitalism is the problem. Number one, I think corruption is the problem, and that happens no matter what kind of a system you have. But in terms of, non-corrupt capitalism, that's not the problem. The problem is the lack of it. The problem is that you let Coca-Cola and Burger King use all those tools, and then the organizations that are supposed to correct for whatever inequity comes of that, you say you can't use those tools. So you've prohibited capitalism from the place where you need it the most, so it can't correct for the inequities of capitalism. So it looks like capitalism is the problem. No, it's the fact that someone intervened and said we can't use it to help people.
Yeah, it's really shocking, and I'm guessing that this is what keeps these issues in place, these broken ideas in place, right? Is this reinforcement? Excuse me. Of these unfortunate broken ideas are reinforced in our society. So what is the greatest change you'd like to see donors make when giving, based on all of this?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of donors. A lot of times I'm speaking to nonprofits at their conferences, or sometimes a college audience, sometimes a corporate audience, but a lot of times I'm talking to donors. And sometimes I'm talking to very, very wealthy donors. UBS might ask me to come to speak to their gathering of family offices at their philanthropy forum, or Ted's Audacious Project might ask me to come to speak to the donors there. And the message I have for donors at all levels is stop giving to charitable programs. And it, gives people pause. It's like heroin. You are addicted to giving to the charitable programs. You see, a program that helps mentor teenage gang members and you want all the money to go to the teenage gang members. Stop that. What you have to do is identify an organization that has an idea, a disruptive idea, a great idea for helping teenage gang members that really works. And then instead of giving money to that program, give money to their fundraising operation. Actively, proactively solicit from them a business plan for growth. I want to see, I'm going to give you $1 million. I want to see $1 million plan for growth. I want to see major gift officers. I want to see foundation grant writers. I want to see the software that they need. I want to see the printed and digital collateral that they need. That's what I want to fund. I don't want a penny of my money to go to a teenage gang member. I want it all to go to the growth of these incredible programs that support teenage gang members. That simple change, if you would start giving to the growth side of the organization instead of the dopamine, drip of I can help a child, I can help a child, you can help a lot more children.
Absolutely, that's the thing. It's similar to the teach a man to fish concept in a way. It's like if you want to help more people, you have to create the situation where the organization that is doing good work is sustainable and is able to keep doing that and to grow. And that's really critical. And if it's just dripping, it's one person at a time or one program at a time, and there's no opportunity for growth.
Yeah, and I would say I don't love this word sustainable. To me, it's so dreary. It's just like keep things the way they are. I know that's not what's meant by it, but it's like sustain. Well, what are we sustaining? We're sustaining hunger at these rates. We're sustaining child illiteracy at these rates. I don't want to sustain these things. I want to overcome them. Yeah. So the idea of nonprofits being sustainable to me is like, I don't want you to be sustainable. I want you to be so huge that you go out of business. I want you to be unsustainable because the problem's gone away,
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I first started nonprofit work, one of my earliest bosses said, the job of a nonprofit is to go out of business, is to accomplish its mission.
Yeah.
And goal.
Yeah. That's like that is a commonplace thing that you hear people say, it should go on a little tchotchke like you buy at the souvenir shop when you're on vacation. Trouble is nobody lives that way. Nobody lives with the goal of putting their nonprofit out of business. They don't think big enough. They don't dream big enough. They conform to these cultural norms about keeping their salaries and their overheads low. They say speak truth to power, and then they won't speak any truth to power. They speak nothing to power, And the power is the mindset around you that keeps you small. The power isn't Donald Trump. He's a different sort of power. The power is very proximate to you, and you're terrified of speaking to it. It's like, I'm gay, right? What does speak truth to power mean? Does it mean in the 1990s, speak to George Bush, he has to say something about AIDS? No, it means tell my mother I'm gay, Tell your donors it doesn't work this way. No. This is not how we're going to change the world. Speak to the people that it's most difficult to speak to, the people right around you.
I absolutely believe you. It's a hard thing to do for many, but so important. I think you kind of touched on this already, but we were talking about fundraising. Isn't investment in fundraising taking dollars away from the intended cause?
No, as I said, it's multiplying the amount of money available for the cause, right? But secondly, even if you were to say, yeah, I agree with you, Dan, that if you spend 10 times the amount of money on fundraising, you're going to raise 5 times the amount of money. But that money, what a shame to have to spend that money on fundraising. It's like wasted money. It's not wasted money. That's money invested in creating a stronger civil society. That's money invested in going out to the general public and speaking to them about the causes we care about and getting them up and off of their sofas and away from their devices and engaged in the great causes of their time. And if we don't let the nonprofit sector do that critical part of its job, there is no one else coming to do it. There is no other sector chartered with building a stronger civil society. That ain't McDonald's job, That ain't even the president of the United States job. The president of the United States job is, functional, managerial, and get reelected. It's the nonprofit sector is our only hope for stronger civil society. And if you tell it you can't spend any money getting more people involved, you got to spend it all on the kids, guess what kind of civil society we're going to have?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's why we continue to chip away at some of the biggest problems in our world, because we're not able to invest enough to really move the needle. What can the individual nonprofit do to get donors to make these changes? I mean, it's really critical, and it's a paradigm shift. So how would we approach that?
So here's what the average nonprofit can do. If any of you listening, run a nonprofit or work for one, what you can do is improve your donor and your staff. Staff is really important, and your board's literacy. Because a lot of times staff thinks in very religious ways about this stuff. Board members think in religious ways. Donors think in religious ways. So you got to change the way your staff thinks about these things. Now, when I say that, the first thing that people say is, what can I tell them? And the truth is, there's nothing you can tell them, because you don't have the persuasion skills that maybe someone like me who does this, all the time has. So I've had lots of people come to my speeches and they get very excited and they get very enthused, and then they go to their board member and they try to say, I heard this guy Dan talk and he said about overhead, and then the first thing, they're interrupted by the board member. Oh yeah, we got to keep that overhead low. And the next thing you know, the person's off their game, and anything Dan Pallotta may have said has vanished from their mind, and they find themselves getting sucker punched in the face by the donor yet again. So after years of seeing this is going to sound like a commercial, and it is to some extent, I decided, why don't I say it for people? Why don't I give them tools that they can give to others that say it for them? So we've just developed these impact kits, and they come like this in the mail, and they say, today is the first day of the rest of your impact. And they're nonprofit staff and board transformation kits. And inside these kits are a few little things. You get this little book called The Everyday Philanthropist, and it's a 1 hour read. It takes an hour to read it. It's got 32 tiny little chapters. They read in about 2 minutes each. Fits in your pocket. It's got big graphics and big type and big charts, so that it's not the kind of book that's going to put people to sleep. I wrote this like for the average person, and in fact, the encomiums on the back that are usually by big important people in the world, I have one here from my mother, and it says, this is the first thing Danny's written that I could understand. Now I know what he does for a living, and I know a better way to help people. So this is like for all those people around you. It's not for like academics. So here's one tool, like give this to everyone, or you buy one of the kits, give it to everyone around you, your entire staff. Second thing is this thing called the Bold Training. If you go to either danpallotta.com or theboldtraining.com, it's a deep immersion in these ideas. It's 3.5 hours of content, 7 modules, got little quizzes embedded in it. I just had one organization buy 500 of them for all of their donor advised fund people. People buy them for their entire board, their entire staff. You can change the conversation in a week. And then there's a discussion guide for the everyday philanthropist, and there's a new monograph called the Flat Org Chart about how disorganized we are in our communities. We have these very flat organizational charts that aren't attended at the top. So before, I used to just tell people you have to have courage, go out and have courage, come out to your board, but people didn't know what to say. It's very easy to say, I'm gay. It's very difficult to say, when you spend less money on fundraising, you are suffocating that part of the organization that is dedicated to growth, and the money spent on fundraising is actually an investment in civil. That's much harder to say than I'm gay, right? So these are tools that can help you say I'm gay in nonprofit speak, and really change the way the people around you think. So I've been saying this to people lately in lots of webinars, right? And inevitably the question will come up. Somebody will say, well, it's great. I loved everything you said, Dan. What can I tell my donors? And see, people are so used to not having any tools, that it is unbelievable to them that there are actually some tools now that can teach your donors to think 180 degrees differently about this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really appreciative. I've seen, you know, from your first TED Talk in 2013 about this, so much change with all that you've done to help, you know, really execute and implement these ideas and help people do that. And I hope, you know, at BitGive that we can embrace this more as well across our board and our staff. That's my goal.
Absolutely.
So don't you think it's impossible to get donors to think differently? I mean, isn't this just the way people think about it? And don't we just have to work within those constraints?
No, and I say that because I've now had, you know, 15 years of experience changing the way donors think about these things. And if it was hard to change the way donors think about this, I would have stopped doing this work a long time ago. It takes 45 minutes to change the way a donor thinks about these things. You know, I give a 45-minute talk and people who thought one way come out thinking the other way because they never had time to think about these things. And so they're just getting the benefit of someone who has had time to think about these things and saw the irrationality in it and explains it to them. And so that's what things like the bold training and the book are able to do. And we've had change, you know, literally 6 weeks after I gave my TED Talk, 3 of the big evaluators, Charity Navigator, GuideStar, and the Better Business Bureau Wise Giving Alliance came out with a press release that said, overhead is not the most important thing to ask about. Many charities should spend more on overhead. The people and communities served by charities don't need low overhead, they need high performance. Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation now saying we're doubling the amount of overhead for our grantees to take away the stigma associated with overhead. MacArthur Foundation increasing their overhead allowance to 29%. So things are changing, and history is just a record of things changing. We've changed the way people think about slavery, about the 4-minute mile, about smoking, about seatbelts, about gay marriage. History is all it is change. And we, those of us in the nonprofit sector, have been called to the great historic service of changing the way the world thinks about changing the world. That's what, you know, whatever you believe in, the universe, destiny, God, that's the one it laid on us. Change the way people think about charity. And it's incredibly doable. And it's exciting to change the way people think about it.
It is exciting, and I feel very much more empowered now after you said that. That's awesome. Yeah, and I've been hearing more about the shift in the philanthropic and family office space, about really starting to actually understand this. And you know, it's great to know that it's finally sinking in, and they're really starting to invest more in, you know, multi-year support for operational expenses, things like that. It's just really, really great to see. So next, so you wrote a blog for Harvard Business Review about what nonprofits can learn from the Apollo program. Can you discuss that?
Yeah, how much time do we have? We want to open it up for questions. We got about 5 or 6 minutes left for our little chat, and then we're going to have some questions.
Yeah, we have some more time, probably about at least 10 to 15 more minutes before we want to open it up.
Okay, great. So Apollo. What we can learn from Apollo is the power of commitment and deadline. Like, a lot of people talk about moonshots now, right? And they use the term loosely without really understanding the deconstruction of what made the moonshot work. And to me, a moonshot is not about how crazy you can think. It's about how committed you can be. And so the key thing that is often overlooked in Apollo is the fact that John Kennedy said, I believe this nation should commit itself to the goal before this decade is out, right? He set a deadline by 1970, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. And you know that someone is serious about their dream when they think it through. Like, if you weren't serious about putting a man on the moon, it would never have occurred to you that you got to get the guy back safely as well, right? So he stated it very specifically in terms of space and time, and then he declared it to the world. The Declaration of Independence, right? The founders said, as of July 4th, 1776, and they weren't passive aggressive about it. You know, they didn't say, hey, look, we hired some consultants and they said, this word independence doesn't play well. Don't use this word independence. Drives the British crazy, right? Likely to start a war. Let's just see how much independence we can get away with, but don't actually use it. So what happens when Kennedy sets that deadline? And what would have happened if he didn't, right? If he didn't, things would have gone on pretty much as they had without any sense of urgency, and we still wouldn't be on the moon. What would have caused us to go to the moon? Nothing, right? If you don't have to be to work by 9 a.m., what's going to cause you to go into work by 9 a.m.? Nothing. You'll never get to work if you don't have to be to work by 9 a.m. So what happened when he set that deadline is, seriously, is people began to say it's impossible. Well, why is it impossible? It's impossible because we know nothing about the surface of the moon. We don't know whether we would put a lander on the moon or just send one big rocket and have the rocket land on the moon. If we sent one big rocket, or even if we had a lander, it would be very heavy. We don't have any kind of booster technology that could put a rocket into escape velocity. We don't know whether we can communicate 400,000 miles away. What kind of a suit would you need? We don't know. We don't even have a pressure suit practically yet. We have all these problems. And even with respect to, we don't have a lunar module. We don't have a lunar module because it would be too heavy. We don't have a lunar module because the fuels are too volatile. We don't have a lunar module because, and you start to get this catalog, this list, this blueprint of all of the problems you would have to solve in order to get to the moon. You start to have a real conversation about how you would do something as impossible as get to the moon. So if you started a conversation in your community, a ridiculous, impossible conversation of, we're going to bring the suicide rate in this city down to 0 in the next 5 years. Well, you would have to start to talk about how ridiculous that is. Well, you can't possibly do that. You can't do that because we don't have enough mental health counselors. You can't help that and do that because there's always going to be suicide. You can't do that because, you know, of the prison system and mental health issues in the prison system. Okay, well, we better get busy talking about all of that stuff. If you never set that deadline, guess what you get to talk about? The weather, right? You get to talk about the weather like we always do. So a deadline, an Apollo-like deadline, begins a powerful conversation in the absence of which you can never solve an impossible problem.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible to think that we did accomplish that, and especially when, right? Like in the 60s, it's like
we did not have a computer any more powerful than a calculator. The computing power that is in an iPhone 12, orders and orders of magnitude greater than what we had to get to the moon, just in an iPhone.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we have a lot of technology folks joining us today as well, so I'm sure they really appreciate that too. So I think if you want to, we do have a couple questions. We can shift over to the Q&A now. We have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Does that sound good? Okay. So the first one is, do you also think the problem comes from nonprofits themselves, the do-gooder mentality? Mentality. Also, if nonprofits were to join forces to address the issues you address, what would you prioritize as a charity movement?
Yeah, I do think we're our own worst enemies. I've often said that the nonprofit sector has a profound inability to get pissed off. If the AIDS community ever had the timidity that the nonprofit sector has with respect to advocating for itself, you know, we would never have gotten anywhere if the gay community had it. Now, what's interesting is we're not timid when it comes to fighting for social justice, when it comes for fighting for people with AIDS, when it comes to, you know, fighting for animals and you know, fighting for the poor, but we're complete cowards when it comes to fighting for more money to build the organization we need to fight for the poor. So, you know, I've created something called the Charity Defense Council to start to address some of the, and you can go to charitydefensecouncil.org, just in response to the second part of that question, what could the sector do? Well, the sector could band together and begin to advertise collectively to the general public, to teach the general public about the good that the sector does and the importance of the sector. You know, we lack brave leadership. There's $1 trillion, more now since I last looked, sitting in the corpuses and the endowments of America's foundations, $1 trillion. I mean, it would be a rounding error on a rounding error for 10 of those leaders to get together, call up one another, say, hey, why don't we each throw in $5 million and inundate the Super Bowl with ads about the importance of the nonprofit sector? A rounding error on a rounding error to do something massively historic and impactful to raise public consciousness about the importance of the nonprofit sector. Other industries have banded together. You know, the milk industry, when they were losing market share to bottled sports drinks, they did the Got Milk campaign, right? All of the milk producers got together to ask America, hey, you got milk for that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The egg industry with the incredible edible egg. The oil industry 10 years ago, a big campaign to say, do you own an oil company? Because everybody thought, oh, these fat cats that own the oil companies. Turns out the oil companies are owned mostly by pension funds and 401ks and IRAs. So to educate the general public that you own an oil company, you know, but the nonprofit sector, you have never seen a full page ad for the nonprofit sector advocating for itself. You've never seen a television ad. You've never heard a radio ad. We are talking about the largest economy in the world, the largest philanthropic sector in the world, $1 trillion sector with $1 trillion sitting in endowments, and we haven't gotten our act together to communicate to the general public. It's unbelievable to me.
I think that, excuse me, that could make an absolutely humongous difference. I would love to see that happen. Okay, so we have a couple more questions. They're really coming in. So let's see. The next one is, it seems like charitable contributions are a zero-sum game. The total pot is 3% of income in the US. If that's true, then doesn't higher overhead mean less help to those who need it overall?
No, only because you think it's a zero-sum game. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think, and by the way, charitable giving is 2%, not 3% of GDP, and it's been stuck at 2% of GDP ever since we started measuring it in the 1970s. If you tell the nonprofit sector you cannot market, how on earth could the nonprofit sector ever take market share away from the for-profit sector? So you get 98% of the money sitting over here in the for-profit sector, 2% of it sitting over here in the nonprofit sector. And we think this is the limit. No. Here's where all the money is. But you won't let us go get any of it because you won't let us talk to the general public about it. So we have no idea where the ceiling is for charitable giving in the United States. We're not competing with one another. We're competing with Budweiser and with Apple and all of the other places people can put their discretionary money. We're competing with M&M Mars and all the millions and millions of dollars that were just wasted on Halloween candy, you know, 2 weeks ago. So I don't at all believe it's a zero-sum game. And look, if you went to, I don't know, if you went to New Zealand, I think it's, you know, or Ireland, I think charitable giving is 0.67% of GDP. If you lived in Ireland, you'd say, well, that's it. That's as much, 0.67%. That's as high as you're ever going to get it. That's where it's been all the time. But then if you went across to England, to London, you'd find it's 1.12%. Oh my God. You can actually get it up to 1.12%. And if you came over across the pond to the US, you say, it's 2%. Oh my God, you can get it up to 2%. Then if you went into like a Mormon tithing community, you'd say, oh my God, it's 10%. They tithe 10%. So we have no idea where the ceiling is not a zero-sum game. I'm sure that in the age of the horse and buggy, people thought, oh, it was a zero-sum game. If a new horse and buggy company comes along, it's going to take market share from another horse and buggy company. And then Henry Ford comes out with the car and says, well, no, not a zero-sum game at all. There's a whole other universe,
Absolutely. Okay, so I think that we had a question that I think you in many ways already answered with this last one. So I'll go to the next one, which is, while you say the civil society organization is the sole responsibility to change civil society, what advice do you have for the incoming Biden-Harris administration to change the NGO sector, specifically around changing tax policies, impact donor advised fund structures, and giving requirements? Now, that's a tough one.
Yeah, look, I think tax policy could influence things in a slightly more than marginal way, but the big issue is mindset. It's mindset. What changed? What gave gay and lesbians the right to marry? It was the national mindset. And so what I would say, the nonprofit sector was not mentioned once in any of the presidential debates at the primary level or at the general election level. I mean, that's unbelievable that we stand for that, that our sector, the army that would be expected to be deployed to solve these social problems, is not even mentioned. We talk about tax policy. Well, excuse me, tax policy, I don't care how much you tax the rich. If you don't know how you're going to deploy that revenue, if you don't know which organizations are the most effective ones, which organizations are the most impactful ones, what are the ways that they're being held back, how you're going to deploy that money to translate into change and change quickly, then it doesn't matter how much we raise taxes. So what I would tell the Biden administration is put someone on your cabinet that's a nonprofit sector liaison. Start to change all of the rules by which nonprofits have to play. Eliminate the overhead measure in the IRS Form 990 so that people can't figure out what the overhead is anymore. They have to start to report on impact. There's a long list of things. Put me in that cabinet position and we'll get a lot done. We'll get a lot done.
I think that's a fantastic.
That would be my big piece of advice. Put me on your cabinet in charge of nonprofits. That's my biggest piece of advice.
I love that. Are you hearing that, President-elect?
Yeah.
I'm sure he's here with us today.
Right. There are 45 participants. At least one of them's got to be here.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. I'm trying to get to all of them, but I don't know that we'll get to everyone. But the next one is, how is COVID-19 impacting charity giving and the challenge around overhead?
I think COVID-19 is just pointing out with grave lucidity how dangerous it was to force charities to focus on keeping their overhead low, because now you're seeing they have no operating cash to keep themselves alive, many of them. So it's only making matters worse. There's nothing much more to say about it. It's making a very bad situation worse. And pointing out that the infrastructure we should have in this country for taking care of the least among us is in really, really bad shape. One other thing I would say, in this monograph that I wrote, that I told you about, the flat org chart. So one problem is the nonprofit sector is in prison, right? That's one reason we're not solving problems. The other reason is the way we're organized. So if you go into any community, any major city, what you'll find are hundreds of players. You'll find 2 or 3 big community foundations, 4 or 5 big United Ways. You'll find family foundations, corporate foundations, the 10 or 20 big nonprofits, the 500 or 1,000 small nonprofits, the police, the courts, the school system, the mayor's office, the legislators' offices, the Office of Economic Development, hundreds of people on this flat org chart, no hierarchy, and it's completely unattended at the top. There's no one here saying, hey, everybody, do this, coordinate in this way. Well, how could we, imagine if we tried to get to the moon that way. Imagine if there was no NASA, no coordinating entity. Grumman, you go build a lunar module. We don't know how big it should be. The hole for the astronauts to get out, I don't know how big the spacesuit's going to be. This guy over here is building the spacesuit, but I can't let you talk to him because I don't exist. You know, the thrusters for the Saturn V, how big should they be? Well, that depends on how heavy the lunar module is going to be. But the guys building the Saturn V don't know how heavy the lunar module is going to be. It's unbelievable. Yet this is how we're trying to solve problems in our community with no leadership or coordination. And then people say, well, we don't want a top-down approach. We love our grassroots ideal. Well, that's interesting, because if I go into any one of your organizations, it's organized top-down. There's a hierarchy inside of every one of your organizations. There's a CEO, and there's a COO, and there's line staff. So that's not true. So we've got to start to open our eyes to the fact that, and I think it's partially because we've treated the nonprofit sector as a joke. So why organize it? It's a joke, right? Well, we've got to get out of this prison, and we've got to organize ourselves. And then I think we can really start to solve community problems.
Wonderful. I appreciate that. So we have a couple more minutes. If you want, we can try to get through a few more questions.
Yeah, let's take one or two more.
Okay. So we have one. Any thoughts on abolishing nonprofit designations and the corresponding tax benefits so they're more well-run, quote unquote, and have more opportunities to change systems and governance as opposed to addressing the results of those systems?
Again, I think it's a mindset issue. And in order to get there, in order to do something that drastic, you'd have to change the mindset in a massive way. You'd have to get people to see that the system is broken. And if you could get people to see that the system is broken, I actually think with some modification that the system that we have right now, where at least donations are tax deductible, is a big benefit to all of us. I think, you know, if you remove that, the tax deductibility of donations, you'd remove a big incentive. And if you remove tax exemption, you know, then nonprofits would have to start paying taxes on the donations, and you'd just have a lot less money to deal with. I mean, you just have this bad system where the government is contracting with nonprofits, giving money out to nonprofits that it collected through taxes from nonprofits in part. So I think it's a mindset issue. You know, is it great that statutorily now we have gay marriage? Yes, it's great. It's wonderful. And it means my partner, my husband and I can file joint tax returns. And it means that we don't have to worry about him being able to visit me in the hospital if I'm sick. But the larger issue is that we're married, and that people in our community accept the fact that we're married, and we get to talk openly to people about our marriage and our children. That's the larger thing. You know, I certainly wouldn't want to remove the statutory stuff, but it's the fact that we've changed everyone's minds about it that is the deepest, the most profound change.
Absolutely. So inspiring.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we still have more questions, but we're out of time. So we have some questions in the Q&A. If anyone else wants to, you know, maybe reach out to Dan separately. Dan, I don't know if you're in our Slack channel, but there's an opportunity there if you want to talk with folks. But I think we'll have to transition now to our next speaker. So do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Yeah, I do. Just go buy this and go do the bold training. That'll change it. It'll make, it's like Advil and Excedrin. It'll make you feel much better. So yeah, go to danpallotta.com and really it doesn't have to be as difficult as it seems.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are here today who have not watched his TED Talk, actually there's two that are just incredibly inspiring. I highly encourage you to go and just take, 30 minutes out of your day to watch them. They're just absolutely incredible. So thank you so much, Dan, for coming and being with us today. It's a true honor to have you here. And
thanks, Connie. My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and good luck to everyone that's listening. Take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.